So on my way here today, I passed about 5 dispensaries and like a dozen billboards promoting dispensaries and vape products with names like unicorn poop and cotton candy clouds, which I've got to say is really weird because I'm not sure what adult is out there thinking, yeah, unicorn poop, that's my flavor. It's almost like they're targeting kids. Because here's the thing, just because it's on a billboard or in a store doesn't mean it's safe. In fact, what's out there can be incredibly risky, especially for kids and teens. Today, we're breaking it down with some of the country's top experts. You'll learn how vaping and high-potency cannabis really affect developing brains, how to spot devices and trends that parents miss, and how to have the kinds of conversations that keep your kids substance-free without lectures or scare tactics. I'm Jodie Sweetin, and this is Awkward Conversations, where we give parents the real facts, the right tools, and the confidence to keep kids safe in a world where risky products are everywhere. Welcome back to Awkward Conversations, and welcome to Season 5. And I am so excited to be here, back with Amy McCarthy, our senior clinical social worker at Boston Children's Hospital in the Division of Addiction Medicine. Amy, a pleasure to be here with you again as Season 5.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Jodie.
Yeah.
We are so excited for today's conversation. Joining us first is Dr. Nora Volkow, Director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. She leads national research on substance use, addiction science, and prevention, and is at the forefront of studying how vaping impacts adolescent brain development and future substance use risk. Hi, Dr. Volkow.
Hello, nice to see you.
You too. And also with us is Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher, Professor of Pediatrics at Stanford University. She's an expert in adolescent decision-making, health communication, and substance prevention, and she created prevention curricula used nationwide to educate youth on the risks of vaping, nicotine, and cannabis. Hi, Dr. Bonnie. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. So happy to be here.
And rounding out our incredible panel is a friend of the show, Katie Drew, Education Programs Coordinator at the DEA. She's joining our elite 3-timer club. Katie oversees development of the DEA's evidence-based prevention tools for parents, educators, and community leaders, translating science into resources people can really use, including upcoming updates to the DEA's vaping brochure. And of course, the DEA, along with the Elks, are the sponsors who make this show possible. Without them, none of this would happen. Hi, Katie. Welcome back.
It's great to be back. Thanks.
I am really happy to be able to talk with you all today. We have had so many great conversations throughout the 5 seasons, but one of the things that we are really facing right now, and I have 17 and 15-year-old daughters, I know that teenagers are being marketed for vaping products, for nicotine, marijuana, all of this. What's the DEA's role when it comes to like vaping prevention? Because it's not necessarily an illegal drug if you're of age, but how does the DEA come into the vaping prevention?
Oh, that's a great question because you're right. Vaping itself is not illegal, but sometimes the things that people vape are illegal. So one of the things that DEA provides is a variety of publications and presentations and information of different resources that include vaping. And so we provide science-based, evidence-informed programs and publications and a lot of other materials that are available to the public.
All of those resources and all of the information you shared is going to be available in our show notes, available to everyone listening today. What is vaping and why should parents care even if their children aren't using substances or vaping?
So vaping is the use of an electronic device in order to heat a product. And the most frequently used for product is nicotine. But it's also utilized for vaping cannabis, and it's also used just for vaping flavors. What it allows is to put in a cartridge a very concentrated substance that then can be absorbed rapidly by the lungs, delivering the drug very rapidly into the brain. And because the products are concentrated, it can actually lead to rapid escalation on the amount of drugs that are consumed by someone. We've seen cases of nicotine poisoning of individuals that are vaping nicotine and end up in the emergency departments because they are consuming huge quantities of nicotine. And its fast delivery into the brain actually also makes it a highly addictive way of administering substances.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bonnie, what is your experience working with families who are vaping and kind of where parents are at understanding some of the risks?
That's a great question. And for the parents out there who are listening, it's really important that parents understand a few things around this. First of all, as was noted by Jodie at the top of the session here, these products come in so many different flavors. There was a study done a few years ago of 15,000 flavors of e-cigarettes. There probably aren't that many now with some of the regulations and changes, but things like unicorn poop, honey doo-doo, sugar booger, that's attracting kids. That's not attracting my age. So parents need to understand, and youth do too. And when we do in our prevention curriculums, we really work hard to help adolescents and parents understand that they're being marketed to. And that's not by accident, because as Dr. Nora said, those products are being targeted to young people. They have the high amount of nicotine, and that allows young people to become addicted and therefore to be customers to the e-cigarette industry. Parents also have to understand that they come in sleek designs. They look like USBs. They look like highlighters. They look like Happy Meal toys. So it's really hard as a parent. I'm a parent now. My kids are adults, but I'm a parent. It's really hard for parents to know what these look like and to be aware. And so many young people hide these products from parents, teachers, and others. And we also really have to understand that these e-cigarettes or vaping products, as Dr. Nora said, are highly, highly addicted. A lot of parents say, oh, well, at least they're not smoking cigarettes. It's okay. No, all the evidence now is showing that, first of all, the amount of nicotine is as high, if not often double, or even more, the amount of nicotine that we find in a pack of cigarettes. Some of them as much as a cartridge of cigarettes or a whole carton of them. And that young people's brains continue to develop to around age 25. E-cigarettes hurt not only brains and brain development, addiction, but our hearts and lungs and other parts of our body as well. And we know that the nicotine can also affect learning, memory, attention span, decision-making, and so on. So my goal is really to help parents and children and their kids and teachers and whomever start having the conversations.
And Bonnie, as you were speaking about saying this is targeted for young people, one of the appeals of these products is that you get conditioned. Nicotine conditions you to the stimuli that you get. And one of the most powerful natural stimuli that conditions us, that is to say, lead us to learn associations, are flavors. So not surprising, adding flavors to vaping makes them even more addictive. So you have a positive feedback between the flavor itself and then the drug itself. And on top of that, this very sleek design that are made to appeal to teenagers. The whole experience sounds targeted to maximize its appeal to young people, which is what we've seen very, very rapidly.
It's a multi-sensory experience ultimately. And I also find it fascinating that these products were marketed initially for adults to reduce their use of using nicotine. And so I think sometimes that's confusing message for families and young people to say, oh, it's actually a helpful tool.
We also actually know from the literature at the population level that e-cigarettes are not effective at helping adults quit smoking regular cigarettes, and that we're attracting more young people to using. And young people, by the way, are not replacing cigarettes with e-cigarettes. They don't want to smoke cigarettes. They are initiating with e-cigarettes and other tobacco products like pouches, but that's what they're starting with. So it is a very confusing message. You're absolutely correct. And young people really thinking that, well, if it's helpful for adults, then it'll be okay for me. And that's not the message that we should be giving. I often say you're not comparing with young people cigarettes versus e-cigarettes. It's e-cigarettes versus air.
With nicotine, we know for number one, it's a highly addictive substance. And it actually, when you start to take it early on, like in childhood or adolescence, it actually modifies the brain because of its pharmacological characteristics. And one of the things that it seems to be doing is actually priming you for the addictiveness of other substances. So studies in animals then were able to delineate what are the changes that nicotine can produce in the brain reward centers that can make that individual more vulnerable to the addictiveness of other substances. The other reality about nicotine is when nicotine leaves your system, which it will, then you are going to be feeling much worse than when you were not taking nicotine. And this is because nicotine produces physical dependence. And physical dependence is associated with dysphoria, irritability, and depression. So while you're on nicotine, you may see a boosting of your mood, but when you are actually no longer the nicotine is in your body or brain, then you're going to have a much more severe depression.
Katie, I'd love for you to speak more on, what these vaping devices can be used for.
Yeah, sure. So in addition to nicotine, people can also vape THC, Delta 8, and even opioids. It's kind of amazing what they can put in there. And they can also just vape flavored water, as was mentioned earlier. And the thing about that is, even if something is innocuous, just the fact that it's being vaped with a vaping device could cause some toxic chemicals, some volatile organic compounds, as we call them, which are also very harmful.
I know one of the things that I've heard about too is that the actual coils, which are often made of copper or different things, once you heat them up, heating up those metals also releases a lot of really toxic chemicals that can be incredibly damaging to young brains.
When you start thinking about what you're inhaling and what you're putting into your body, it starts getting pretty scary and pretty kind of dubious. Katie, I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more? What is Delta 8? I think that might be a new term for some of the folks listening.
Sure. Delta 8 is a kind of a byproduct of cannabis. We are used to hearing about THC Delta 9, which is something that is regulated. But Delta 8 is a byproduct of hemp production that kind of got in under the wire. It's a gray area. And even though Delta 9 was regulated, because Delta 8 is made from hemp, which recently the laws changed, people started manufacturing it from hemp, but it has very similar, almost the same kind of consequences as Delta 9. And so they're saying that it's not regulated, so it's legal. DEA is saying it's not legal, and it's one of those areas that have been compromised or utilized by people. But THC Delta 8 does have some of the same consequences as Delta 9. It can still cause harm. It can still cause somebody to get high, and it's not something that we want our young people to use. And Dr. Nora may be able to expand more on Delta 8. I'm not sure.
They actually extract it and just concentrate it and sell it in high doses and concentrates. And you can see these products actually in places where there's no legal, medical, or recreational marijuana. So it's a way to disguise THC.
I know a lot of those products too are often sold, off market. They're advertised to kids on Snapchat, things like that. And often those ones are even more unregulated, often laced with things. But in terms of actual cannabis use and marijuana, what makes the marijuana concentrates and things like dabbing and heating up these concentrated oils, what makes it particularly?
What makes it particularly risky is that you are delivering a substance at an extremely high concentration. And we know now from many epidemiological studies that the use of high content THC in marijuana cigarettes, just the regular way that it was used, is associated with a higher risk of psychosis. The higher the content of THC, the higher the risk of psychosis. And in teenagers, the use of these products can actually trigger not just that acute psychotic episode that can happen to any one of us, but it can actually result in a chronic psychosis, which is what is described as schizophrenia. So there is this concern that has been going on for many, many years in the psychiatric world that the use of marijuana with high content THC is one factor that increases the risk for schizophrenia. It certainly is a factor that triggers psychosis at high enough concentration, any one of us. So what's happened with vaping is that your content of these cartridges of THC can be 95%, of which, say, for example, you may be able to absorb by your body something perhaps of 50-60%, which is at least 3 times higher than the highest cigarette that you can buy out there. So it's a delivery system extremely effective for achieving high concentrations. And this, in turn, of course, is associated with much higher risks. And the other issue that you've all been discussing, which is the notion of this vaping of cannabis, THC. If you recall, it was, I think, in 2019 when there was these EVALI syndromes where people were dying from vaping THC. And this exactly reflects the dangers of these devices. They were, the way that they are produced led to an inflammatory response in the lungs that was in some cases fatal. That is, again, the risk of having these products that are totally unregulated, delivering a substance that is highly addictive in the most addictive way that it can be delivered, which is very fast into the brain, high concentrations.
You're listening to Awkward Conversations. Thanks for being here.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Welcome back. You're watching Awkward Conversations.
Yeah, we see young people, unfortunately, all the time facing, these issues resulting from vaping. I know cannabis hyperemesis syndrome also is something that, has been a concern in recent years because of the high potency. Dr. Bonnie, could you tell us a little bit more, what is dabbing exactly? And again, what makes that particularly risky for young people?
Yeah, it's a great question. Dabbing is really very similar to what we've been talking about, but it's highly, highly concentrated. It's a wax that is highly concentrated, and then it could be basically dissolved in and put into a bung or a pipe or inhaled that way, and inhaled the aerosol from that or the smoke from that. And you are getting upwards, and Dr. Nora can correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in the 20% THC is what we're seeing for your sort of regular products, which is still multiple times stronger than what we saw with THC products a couple decades ago. But the dabbing is about 80+% THC, huge amounts of concentrated THC that is absolutely, as Dr. Nora said, and we talk about this a lot in our curriculums, and I'm in a division of adolescent medicine. Our doctors are seeing young people with cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, schizophrenia, psychosis, and so on. That is really, we think, attributable to the higher concentration of the THCs, and particularly dabbing. And the problem is that young people don't realize this. Adults don't either, by the way. I see and talk to a lot of adults who don't understand the high concentration, don't understand the doses, think that, I don't feel it, like with edibles. I don't feel it right away, so I'm going to keep using, and by then they're feeling pretty sick. So with dabbing in particular, it's so highly concentrated, and young people don't understand how much THC they're getting, how addictive it is. In fact, young people don't think, and parents, you have to understand this, don't realize that it is addictive. They think, cannabis, it's no big deal. It really is, and especially with dabbing that has that 80 to 90% THC, just a tremendous amount.
We've said it before on this show, but I think it always bears repeating, the substances of today are not the substances of yesterday.
I talk to my kids all the time, and I say, the margin for error of substance experimentation that I think even, when I was in high school 20 some plus years ago, it was a far less dangerous sort of landscape. Then, you weren't having fentanyl, you didn't have, the opioid crisis was beginning, but it was not what it is today, as we've seen. And it's really scary, I think, as a parent to try and figure out, what the landscape is, because it's shifting, continuously.
One aspect that we need to understand is the higher content THC, the higher the likelihood of addiction, but also the younger you start getting exposed to cannabis, the greater the risk that you will become addicted to cannabis. So the adolescent brain is particularly vulnerable to the addictiveness of substances, and that includes cannabis. And the younger you start, the more the risk that you will become addicted to that substance. So I think that this is an important fact that parents need to know, because they say, well, what's the big deal? First, it's a very different type of drug. It's almost that you can say you cannot compare apples and oranges. But also, regardless of that, they have to realize that what may be not as harmful in an adult in terms of the addictiveness of the compound, it is much worse in an adolescent.
I know one of the things that we have repeatedly said on Awkward Conversations is that, the adolescent brain, the young person's brain is still developing, like you said, up until the age of around 24, 25. And if you can delay that first use, delay the drinking, delay any substance use, like Dr. Nora just said, explaining to them, this may be, a different effect on adult brains, but your brain isn't done yet. Your brain isn't cooked.
Yeah.
Don't marinate it in, these substances and highly addictive things, because it will build your brain differently than it would if you could delay some of that first use.
And I also think that, what comes up again a lot is this is a natural substance. These things are naturally occurring. It's safe for me, especially with deregulation and things of that nature. And I think about, snakes can be poisonous and they're natural. Berries can be poisonous and they're natural. But also, it doesn't really feel that cotton candy or sugar booger flavored something coming out of a heated implement. It's not nature anyway either too. So I think there's some educational points on all of those perspectives to share with families.
One of the other things, and when you're both talking about brain development, and I think the way you phrase it is absolutely perfect. We don't want to give the impression that therefore young people are stupid or that they're not competent. So it's what I talk to young people and parents about is it's so cool that your brains are developing. Your brains are figuring out, who am I? What do I want to do in life? What should I be? What do I like? What do I dislike? And along that process is your brain, if you expose your brain during that development to drugs, your brain rather than says, I don't need this receptor in my brain that could disappear and lay dormant or disappear during the pruning phase, it says, oh, I need this and I need to keep this. So the point is that I like to talk about it as a very positive reason for young people's brain development. And I think that's really important. And that's how we do it in our curriculums. And young people love brain science if it's taught positively.
Again, you don't want young people moving or getting the message that that it just creates a block, right? Well, you're you don't know anything. I know everything. I'm better, right. Or I'm smarter. My brain's developed. It doesn't help move the conversation forward.
Well, kids are smart. They, one of the things that we always talk about on this show is having real, honest conversations with your kids. They're not dumb. They're exposed to a lot, and you can have these real conversations with them, in ways that aren't scary, that aren't fear-mongering, but that really are honest and open about some of the things that teenagers these days are facing.
But, one of the things is speaking about with parents and teenagers, I think that it's not which brain is better or not, is the brains are different. And one of the areas that actually characterizes teenagers is they are extremely intense. Their cognitive abilities can be very, very precise, but where they err on is their ability to self-regulate their emotions and the sensitivity that they have to social networks and pressure. And that's what actually can make them very impulsive, which is necessary for normal brain development because they need to put themselves out there in the world and learn. So these characteristics is crucial for that stage in their lives. But unfortunately, it can also put them at risk for doing behaviors that are risky, like taking drugs. So it is the issue of how we are developing. Our brain continues to change until we're very, very old. The rate at which it changes is much faster during the first 2 decades. And that allows the brain to optimally reach its architecture. But I think that for parents, what is relevant is to recognize that the ability that a teenager has for self-regulating their emotions is very different from that of an adult.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's, what I always say makes teenagers terrifying. And my mom used to say the same thing, is that taking risks is part of what you need to build yourself up and develop yourself as someone who is resilient and tries new things. But it also means that teenagers are going to take risks that they don't think ahead of time what the long-term consequences are. And that's kind of our jobs as parents. Katie, we did want to talk a little bit about some of the trends and some of the data because, I know there was a report that came out recently, I think, that vaping is actually down since 2020, but it's still high. So can you speak a little bit to kind of where we're at in that process of, hopefully lessening some of the usage?
It is true. Vaping has gone down since 2020, but it's still up there. And 1 in 5 high school seniors still report that they vape nicotine, among other things. And it's kind of difficult sometimes to know that, for other people to know that, because they've gotten very good at hiding it. It can be very discreet. It can be odorless. It's easy to conceal, and there's also lots of different vaping devices that can be used. You've got your normal vaping device, which usually people know what that is, but it could also be a USB stick or a pen or something else that is used to vape things that can be hidden very well. And one of the things about vaping is that it correlates with the risk of binge drinking. So when that increases, binge drinking also increases, as well as cannabis use. So which is 20% more likely, or 20 times more likely, rather. So even though it's gone down, it's still a major problem that we want to address. And it's one of the things that what parents can do is, parents want to be able to talk to their kids, but kind of how do they do that? How can you talk to your kids to make sure that they are listening to you and you can provide information? So we have something in one of our resources that's called an information sandwich. You ask your child if you can share something with them. It's like they can give you permission to share something with them, and then you offer some key facts. That's the middle of your sandwich, and then you check that there's understanding for that. Because I'm a parent, and as a parent, you want to make sure they have all this information, but you also want them to be able to receive it in a way that they'll remember it and maybe listen to you or act on that, and therefore then lead a life that does not involve vaping.
Katie, what I love about what you just said is, these conversations, I think, give families an opportunity to kind of level the playing field. I think there's so many parents where they might bring up one of these, something about, I heard about dabbing, and their kid will either be like, how do you know about dabbing? But it kind of builds a little bit of credibility. You're like, wait, what do you know about dabbing?
Right.
You kind of or they're like, I had no idea, but it's an opportunity to educate the child, on these things that are out there, so that when they run into them in school or with their friends, they're not kind of lost of I don't know what this is. Let's talk about some other helpful strategies for parents or caregivers, to kind of combat some of this stuff. Dr. Nora, could you tell us some strategies that you have in mind that you want to share with families?
Well, the most important thing is to promote a dialogue of the parents with the children, so that the children feel that they trust the parents, and to start speaking with their children as young as they are about objective information that relates to drug use and why it's negative. It can have negative consequences, with a message that's salient to them. I mean, this came very clear when it was realized that, say, telling teenagers you're going to die of cancer when you're 50, 60 made no impact on the brain. But on the other hand, if you can relate vaping to something that can directly influence them right now on the way that they think, on the way that they perform, for example, with sports, on their attitude. So actually passing that dialogue. And overall, what prevention research has shown us, that one also of the most important factors are the parents, yes, and they have to have that communication, but they also have to provide alternative behaviors for those teenagers to thrive.
Thank you so much. What about you, Dr. Bonnie?
100% agree with Dr. Nora, and she said a lot of the same talking points that we say in our curriculums when we talk to parents. Just to add on a little bit more, one of the things that we often say, and I say, and parents are listening to this, is go home. Maybe you're listening with your kids. Great. If you're not, you could say, son, daughter, child, I listened to a podcast. I listened to some people talking. And can I tell you what I learned? It's kind of the sandwich effect, but I would say what I often do is, this is what I learned. Can we go learn together? Can we go to the websites? Can we go to get some information? Let's learn together. My lab, we often say it's not a lecture. It's not a confrontation. It's a conversation. And let's have that conversation together. We're not trying to catch you or got you. For parents to children or teachers to children, we're trying to help them. And if they are using, if you find that out, which you may not find out right away, it may take a few times to find out. It might take a few times to help prevent. It may take a few times, ultimately our goal is to prevent or to help them quit if they are using, or some harm reduction techniques, like at least cut back or use it in a more safer way. Obviously, we'll want them not to use at all, but if they are using, let's keep them safe. Let's make sure that they're in a safe environment. So I often say that with parents, that's what you need to talk to your young people. You can't schedule. I have a friend who said, I'm going to schedule in, August 15th to have a conversation with my kids. That's not going to happen. And we have to be honest, no blame and shame involved. As Dr. Nora said, mental health is so much behind substances. let's not blame, let's not shame, let's help. And young people are often addicted. So yelling at them isn't going to help. Suspending them, expelling them isn't going to help. We need to get them into care and really help them. And so that's the mindset that I would say that parents and any adult need to have when they're talking to young people.
Absolutely. I know one of the things that we have said over and over again on this show is the car is a great place for conversations. You don't have to look at each other. It doesn't feel confrontational. It doesn't feel, and you both got to get to where you're going. So it's a limited amount of time. You're in the car 20, 30 minutes, an hour maybe. And, they know that this will come to an end at some point rather than a mom lecture that might be an hour long.
100 1-minute conversations versus one 100-minute conversation.
Exactly.
That is so true. I've had the best conversations with my kids in the car that have been so productive.
Yeah.
So.
My teenagers will get in the car and all of a sudden they'll start talking and I'm like, they never do this at home.
Magic.
Don't look,
Magic.
right? Don't adjust the volume on the radio. Apparently everything's okay. Yeah. I just want to thank all three of you for joining us today. Dr. Nora, do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to leave parents with so that they can really be the most effective in talking to their teens and young people?
First of all, thanks for having me. But importantly, the parents are the most important protective factor that a child or a teenager has against substance use. And that requires trust and engagement. So that participation is crucial. And something that we haven't discussed also is they have to lead by examples. It does not work for a parent to say, do not take drugs, and then they go and smoke cigarettes behind their children's back or they are vaping. That is actually a completely wrong message. You need to lead by example. And I think that actually is one of the main lessons to pass over.
Great. And Dr. Bonnie, any last thoughts or anything that you would like to also let us know that you're promoting or working on?
Yeah, 100% agree again with Dr. Nora. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everybody who's listening and hopefully learning from today. One of the things that I would just say is please check out our lab resources. They're completely free. I am not selling you anything. It's my Reach Lab at Stanford. So it's stanfordreachlab.com. We have several free prevention and intervention curriculums for schools and for parents and healthcare providers on cannabis, tobacco, including vaping, but cigarettes, e-cigarettes, pouches, hookah, you name it, it's on there. We have a fentanyl prevention lesson. We have alcohol. We have Safety First, which is our harm reduction curriculum. And we also have cessation resources and lots of videos, box breathing, stress reduction, posters, you name it. So they're free. Please check that out and share it and use it and just have those conversations.
And again, those will all be in our show notes, links to those so that everyone is able to gain access to such great resources.
Dr. Nora, are there resources also that NIDA has?
Yeah, I would say we also have, I basically invite all of the parents and teachers to go to our NIDA website, where we actually have material specifically for the targeted audience. We also have in our web pages material that targets for teenagers. And so this is something that the parents can guide their children or teenagers towards. That's one. The second thing is almost for 10 years, we've been following close to 12,000 children who were 9 to 10 years of age, following them prospectively to try to understand how the adolescent brain develops and how substances affect it, and what is the relationship of substances with mental illness and cognitive performance. And that data is also widely available, and there are several products that have been targeted for lay public that can also be downloaded for anyone that's interested. Also clarify is we've been discussing the effects of vaping, but we haven't been discussing secondary effects of nicotine vaping. So what happens when a parent is vaping? Some of that vaping can go into the children's brain if they actually have young children. And that's something that also deserves attention, and it's likely to be associated with tolerance to nicotine and withdrawal. So there are many aspects that are complex regarding these behaviors, and which actually just highlights that we cannot neglect them or ignore them just because nicotine is not an illicit substance or marijuana is not an illicit substance in many of the states. These are very active drugs, and when delivered through electronic cigarettes or combustibles, they can actually result in very strong pharmacological effects, including addiction.
That's such an important point. I'm so glad you raised it, and something maybe for a future episode.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about.
And Katie, what's new on the resource front with the DEA? I know you guys have offered so many great resources over the seasons. What is new and available to parents and educators?
I love that DEA provides resources for parents and educators and for the general public. A lot of people see DEA as just a law enforcement agency, but we would love to put ourselves out of a job. We would love to get all of these people off of drugs. And so we want to provide all the information that we can. So one of the things that we already have is lots of information on drugs. And for the parents who want to educate themselves, they can go to our different websites to get more information on particular drugs. It's getsmartaboutdrugs.com. That's for parents, educators, and caregivers. There's justthinktwice.com. That's for students. We have one for campuses. It's campusdrugprevention.gov. And of course, we have our free curriculum for teachers and for anybody else, which is operationprevention.com. But one of the things that we continually do is update our resources. We did have a vaping brochure, but we're actually working on another one that should be out very soon. We've talked with a lot of researchers, particularly ones in one of the universities of Virginia that have been studying vaping and the things in vaping and the different ways that people vape and basically all the information you can think of. So we've taken that information and we've taken information from the Monitoring the Future study, which has a lot of vaping information and some of the youth vaping trends. And we also have info on emerging threats that include the types of things that are vaped, like, as mentioned earlier, THC, Delta-8, marijuana concentrates, etc. So keep an eye out because that brochure will be out very shortly. And we do have community outreach specialists in 23 field divisions around the country that we can connect people with if they want more information. And our COSs, as we call them, then we'll work with local communities, local school groups. They do presentations, and then they can share that PowerPoint presentation on vaping with the public if it needs to get used. And then one more resource that's new that we've been working on is 5 different flyers that are tips for talking with youth. So we have 5 new fact sheets. One is tips for talking to preschoolers, tips for talking to elementary students, tips for talking to middle school students, tips for talking to high school students, and then tips for talking to young adults. These are actually brand new. They are on our websites, and they're available for anybody. So we can provide all of our materials in both digital and hard copy. If you want hard copies, you just need to contact your local community outreach specialist, and that information is also on the websites.
That's great. So if we've seen your stuff before, Katie, if we've gone to the DEA's website before, last season or the season before, now is a great time to go back and see the new stuff that's available. This is really exciting.
Yeah, it is. Research and everything, is updated constantly. So it's really important that parents stay up to date about, like you said, all of these new and emerging threats and what we're dealing with currently. So thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today. We really appreciate all of the support of the DEA with this show and, throughout the seasons, being able to talk to parents and have real, honest, sometimes awkward conversations it's really been a gift. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. We really appreciate it.
Third time has been the charm. Ladies, it has been so wonderful to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining Jodie and I for this awkward conversation that was pretty not so awkward, as always.
Not so awkward. We actually did a pretty good job, and we had some amazing guests and some amazing resources. Again, go check out the show notes so that you can find all of the things that we've talked about and all of the resources that you might need.
No, thanks for the invitation and thanks for your interest in the topic.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope all the parents do tune in and check out all the important resources and know that we are there for you during these difficult times. This is a hard subject, but we are there for you. Thank you all for having me.
It has been my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with Awkward Conversations. I know as a parent, one of the things that terrifies me is sort of the lack of practice, I guess, that really is required to get your license.
When we think about careers or professions, in order to become a manicurist in most states, you need over 1,000 hours of practice. To become a licensed barber in many parts of the country, you need 5,000 hours. But in most states, in order to get that piece of plastic that says you're licensed to drive, you need 50 or less. When you start to build up the risky decisions that young people make, alcohol with cannabis with speed, you can see how this doesn't become an A plus B equals C. It becomes an A to the 4th times B to the 6th, which can result in lots of horrendous and catastrophic results. we forget that driving is an art and a science. Because as much as we want to be good coaches to our young people, there's no guidebook on how to teach your kid how to drive. So some great resources out there that, again, leverage technology to develop those skills that are so important to the long-term safety of a young person on the roads.
Make sure to check out GetSmartAboutDrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.